Hey everybody, Josh Sigurdson, World Alternative Media, and of course we're joined by author and economic analyst here at WAM, John Sneisen, and we are joined by one of the most knowledgeable people on the subject of silver, the host of the Morgan Report, David Morgan. Thank you for joining us.
Well, it's great to be with you. Thank you for having me.
Well, I'd figure I'd start it off early, right to the point here. First of all, how undervalued do you think silver is, and how do you think it'll perform in 2018? Because we've seen this suppression of the price for quite some time, and it seems to be breaking trends recently.
Well, how undervalued? I mean, it's a pretty subjective question. It's a great question. Basically, some of your most experienced and best miners in the world are kind of break even at this price. So anytime you buy any commodity under the cost of production, I mean, for example, let's say you buy silver at 15, you can, it's over 17 today. But for a thought experiment, let's say you're a top tier miner, silver miner, and it's cost you 17, and that's a zero profit. And the price slips down to 15. Well, if you bought a whack of silver at that price, you've actually just become one of the best silver miners in the history of mankind. Well, I'm exaggerating, but you get my point. The point is that you're doing better than a top tier producer can do momentarily. So normally, any commodity, be it corn or a metal or whatever, if you can buy it for less than the producer and hold on, you can do well. So how undervalued? Probably across the board, one of the most undervalued, underappreciated, and loathed commodities out there. And of course, I've been a silver fan for a long time. And people ask, how can I do it with silver going from, the $5 level when I started the website, actually below that, all the way up to 50, and then calling it the top, and then watching it come all the way down to, like it hitting in the 14 handle in 2015. And the answer is I started at a very young age, and I developed ice water in my veins. But most people can't hang on to a commodity through that kind of movement and come out with any sanity. Not saying that I'm sane, but I pretend to be.
Well, there's a lot of patience involved, of course, when you understand the market. And
well, talking about silver, I've been in for not for quite as long as you, but I just keep it. It's a part of my wealth insurance. I keep it stowed away, and I understand, what it's there for. So it's always safe, and out of my mind, I don't really care about the price per se that we see today. I understand the fundamentals and historical aspect of silver.
That's what I wanted to go into, David. Now, we've seen attacks from left and right on gold and silver over the years. ETFs appear to have been holding silver and gold in an artificial bear market since 2012, like a beach ball underwater, gaining pressure. Can you go into where the price should be compared to where it is, and why the banking system is so desperate to manipulate the price of gold and silver while the physical sales continue to take off?
Well, all markets go from undervalued to fair value to overvalued. And silver's actually done that, in my opinion, and also objectively. I want to backtrack a little bit and bring me back on point about why it's been suppressed and where it's going to go. But I want to point out that I do both investing and trading. I mean, my core position of physical silver is sitting there and accumulates. So, if you do it on a per ounce basis, I'm wealthier than ever in terms of silver coins. As far as in the form of US dollars, not so much. But I also, make these massive long-term trades, like, for example, what I mentioned at 2015, we hit the 14 handle. I mean, I had myself and everybody that follows the Morgan Report, our paid subscribers, just load up. And then I called the top basis of the commitment of traders in late summer 2016. So that was like an 8-month trade. But boy, was it lucrative. I mean, for example, you watched AG go from 250 up to about 1850, and I pretty much hit the bottom and top. I don't claim to do that every time, but on that one, we're pretty close to that. And that'd be like silver going from like 14 to 140 or something. So, I take profits. So what do I do with profits? Well, most of the time, besides buying another luxury car, and I'm joking, I usually add to my silver position. But you asked me a question, why are the banks so afraid of it? And the answer is that gold is the best barometer in the world for thousands of years to show that the economic financial system is having massive problems, and it is. And so if you can keep the biggest broadcaster off the street without a bullhorn, and power for the bullhorn, you're doing a great job. So I think that's part of it. I'm not a huge conspiracy guy, but conspiracy fact. I mean, there's so many books written. Sutton's written a book, and many have written over the years about the price manipulation. Dimitri Speck, who I always get to rub elbows with and always honor the time together when I'm in Germany, which is usually about once a year, wrote probably the Bible on gold manipulation. Everyone that's serious should read that book. I mean, you can't look at the facts objectively and say it isn't. You look at my own book, the Silver Manifesto, there's a whole chapter on silver manipulation in that book. And I think it's stand up in court of law, but I wrote it and I'm biased. But the point being, the Sharpe's ratio, if you understand what that is, and this is not economics 101, excuse me, I'm on a rant, but some of the, most of the people on Amazon will give it a 5-star because they've read the book. But every once in a while, I get somebody that hates me that puts, 1 star. It's Economics 101. That book is not Economics 101, not if you read it. But anyway, so there's so many key objective facts that point to management. I prefer that word. You can use manipulation. I don't care what you use. The point being is that no market like gold and silver trade the way that they do. Who would want to sell something they had a lot of at the lowest possible price? Really?
Exactly.
How about the Bank of England saying, hey, yeah, let's get down around 250 or so and sell all of our gold? I mean, this is absolutely, totally, completely ridiculous. And yet people will actually buy into this because somebody from the mainstream news said that it was a good idea because gold doesn't pay interest. Really? Brilliant.
Well, we up here in Canada actually confronted the finance minister of Canada, Bill Morneau, who had basically done the finishing blow on gold, sold off the rest of Canada's gold. And when we confronted him on it, he basically said, well, gold doesn't really hold any value, so that's why I did it. And, it's just absolutely insane when Venezuela has more gold than a country like Canada or Norway, for example.
Also sold it off, yeah.
But with that said, I mean, the Exchange Stabilization Fund, for example, which no one seems to talk about anymore, of course, it was established in, I think, 1933, around that time, using gold that was confiscated under FDR. And, of course, a lot of that gold later went to the IMF as well. But the Exchange Stabilization Fund has been a massive manipulator, if you want to call it that, of the gold markets.
Throughout history, yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And there seems to be a lot of this fear of the public, getting their hands on gold and having sound wealth insurance. Just looking at Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Scotiabank, all these banks were caught in a court of law manipulating the value of gold and silver over the past couple years alone. So obviously it says something about how great of a wealth insurance gold is and how great of a wealth insurance silver is when these guys get involved and try and hold it down, does it not?
Absolutely. I mean, you have to go to the facts that you're using and you have to look at what they're doing, not what they're saying. I mean, basically, they say gold's not money. I don't know what it is. It's a tradition, blah, 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 blah. But the facts are that central banks have been net accumulators of gold for about the last 6 years. Mm-hmm. Well, why is that? Of course, Canada, as you say, and the Bank of England, I mean, this is your patrimony. This is your heritage. This is your birthright. And they squander it away with some lame, vain excuse. I mean, once the collapse happens further, because we are collapsing, you will see, I think, people that are awake and aware, such as yourselves, and doing the jobs that you both do to enlighten people. There's an old expression, once the ship has sunk, everyone knows how it might have been saved. Well, what's going to happen is when real money comes to the fore again and they can't hold it down, and I think that's still a distinct possibility, that people will wake up and say, oh, my, the gold will get the my's. My, I didn't know gold was up to 3,000. My, gold's at 4,000. Kind of be like the Bitcoin scenario now. And this is when people are going to, well, why? I don't like gold going up. They don't get it because they've been brainwashed. Oh, sure. But the fact is that the only preserver of wealth for thousands of years is basically gold, and silver is a close cousin. And if you go back in true monetary history, silver's been money more places, more often, and more transaction than gold by far because of the people's money. And people, I'm going to go off on a rant, but it's a question I get often. So what's the gold-silver ratio? Yeah. So I was on a panel recently in San Francisco at the Silver Gold Summit, and someone asked me that question or alluded to it. And, when gold and silver had the exact same function, which was money, on a bimetallic standard, the ratio was 12-1, which was the natural ratio, which is exactly how it came out of the ground at that time. Now the natural ratio out of the ground is about 9-1. And then silver was less monetized than gold at times, so we got into more of the 1700s. And so then after the Bank of England, England again, sorry about that, was having another monetary crisis, Sir Isaac Newton put the Bank of England back on the gold standard. And he was asked, well, what's the correct ratio of silver to gold? And he looked out the window and saw the street was about 15.5 to 1, so he pegged it at 15.5 ounces of silver to 1. So that's also a monetary ratio. But the point is that these metals are not going away, and they are here for a lot of reasons, and the smart money is quietly moving back into them.
Yeah, you absolutely took over our last question there with the silver gold ratio. I can imagine you get asked that a lot because, especially recently, John, we've been just talking about the massive rally for gold.
Actually, yesterday I posted on Steemit, I posted a video on the silver gold ratio and how it's lately has been, very, very high. It's been going down a bit, and it's predicting something happening in the economy because every time the gold silver ratio peaks, where gold is way overvalued compared to silver, it always predicts something happen, a big market event. So I'm seeing that coming down the line. Who knows, this year, next year? I think it's very close right now because it's starting to go down now, which means that something is in the works.
Yeah, and it shows a lot of the desperation at the hands of the banks and etc. when people are pouring into gold, silver, cryptocurrencies, etc. while pulling out of the bonds markets, while fiat continues to devalue.
Yeah, and also like I love history as you do, Dave Morgan, and I seen throughout history, gold and silver being the currency, and so many, like in the last 100 years, so many countries started on a gold and silver currency, and then they just slowly debased it with lesser and lesser metals. In my latest book, Canada, the Greatest Economy in the World, I explain, in great detail how the Royal Canadian Mint, continued to devalue and debase the value of the $1, as we call the loonie up here in Canada.
Yeah, well, and that kind of brings me to my next question, David. All fiat currencies eventually revert to their intrinsic value of zero. They always have, they always will. Going back to 1024 AD in China, gold and silver has always prevailed. Why do you think that is, and what does that say about fiat centrally planned currencies?
Well, first of all, something I've been doing on my podcast, I don't do it every week, although I plan to, and it slips my mind, is the statement that there is nothing more powerful than the truth. And the truth is you cannot print wealth. You can't manufacture it on a printing press. That's the truth. And that truth comes out time and time again throughout history, which means that these currencies go to zero, or for all practical purposes zero, and they fail. And that statement is the one financial statement you can make with an almost guarantee, because everyone through all of recorded history has failed so far, and the only one that hasn't failed all the way yet is the U.S. dollar, which is, as you well know, the reserve currency of the world. But if you look at the Federal Reserve Board, they'll tell you that a $1913 is worth 3 cents. So it's about a 97% way already to absolute failure. So we're kind of arguing about, or not arguing, we're discussing, what's going to happen over the next X amount of time, and how much of that 3 cents that's left out of 1913, what's it going to look like? And the answer is no one knows for certain. And I think the bankers are definitely planning whatever they plan as far as, all digital currency, which basically the US dollar is anyway. Are they going to the blockchain? And there's a lot of questions that are unknown, but there's so many distortions in the real economy. And that's the problem, because people don't live in the financial markets. People live on the street, and they look for real goods and services, and they try to get them at value. And everything that's really needed is costing more and more and more. Check your food budget, check your life insurance or your health insurance, check your transportation costs. All that stuff is going up. And yet all this nonsense that we really don't need is cheaper and cheaper all the time. So there's huge distortions, which is typical of any end time scenario, meaning a failing economy or economic situation. And this is what we have globally. Are there pockets of prosperity? Yes. Are there good ideas coming to the fore? Yes. Are there brilliant people out there doing wonderful things? Yes. But when the system is rotten from the top, that rot is pervasive throughout the whole system. So it basically washes out a lot of productive capacity that could be happening if it wasn't for overregulation and the unknown. How much are you going to have to do to overcome all these, let's say, headwinds against you to make a true profit in today's market? And the answer, it's phenomenal, the amount of stress that these poor entrepreneurs at a low level, meaning, startups or even businesses that have been around for a while, because the minimum wage keeps going up, the guarantees by the government that's into dictating to these entrepreneurs what they can and cannot do, what they can and cannot pay, what kind of health insurance they have to provide, what kind of vacation pay they have to provide, what kind of maternity leave they have to provide. Yeah. None of it's free market, and everything's based on the big brother telling everybody that owns a business how to run their business.
Well, isn't it interesting that it's kind of like this push by big government to, under the guise of, well, we're trying to save small businesses and stop big monopolies by regulating small businesses out of the market and propping up big monopolies by, the minimum wage hike, as you mentioned, as an example there. Well, now, Walmart can afford to pay a higher minimum wage, McDonald's can, but the small business can't. So how exactly is that going to prosper among the employed and those that are trying to work and make money for their family, etc., when they're given this worthless currency at a lower rate all the time, or getting laid off because the government has to step in to try and quote unquote help them?
Yeah, well, all these tax hikes and the lower, the more inflation we get, it's all a cause of the fiat currency system and the printing of money. That's the root cause of all this stuff that we see. They're discussing, the big academics or Keynesians are talking about, or anybody that's out there. They don't seem to understand like the underlying failure of the system that is built, that you can't print wealth, as you said, David.
Well, it's funny because I think the only great example of a long-term prospering current fiat currency, as when it comes to use or value, insurance of its value, would be the collector item of having a paper currency, $1 trillion bill from Zimbabwe or something. You can buy it for a few dollars on the internet. Other than that, it's wallpaper long-term.
Yeah, well, I actually have an interesting collection of hyperinflated currencies, and I say it's the most overvalued, worthless collection of currencies.
Yeah,
so,
absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, John, you had a question?
Yeah, David, what is the number one reason people should consider silver?
Well, they need to consider a balanced, objective portfolio. And what that means is if you do a portfolio analysis objectively and find out what's your best returns over a long period of time, you want to balance a portfolio, which usually means stocks, bonds, and whatever. Well, if you do that study and you look at Ibbotson and Associates, you'll find that they recommend about a 15% holding of physical precious metals to make the best return over a long period of time. Well, CPM Group did that recently. In fact, 2 years ago, Jeff mentioned it at the Silver and Gold Summit, and he did it again this year. I just had him on my mastermind series for our members. And that number is 25% going from 1968 to present day. So if you wanted the best, safest, risk-adjusted return, in other words, the safest balanced portfolio, you would have a 25% exposure to the precious metals. Amazing. I mean, that's about as bullish as you can get. I mean, I've recommended about 20%. And the facts, this is not opinion, this is what the analysis proves, is a 25%. So, this is a message that is never heard outside of, venues like yours, where someone like me can speak the truth to people, and yet it goes on deaf ears. And, unfortunately, and I'll state it the way I see it, me, people that really are savvy and get it usually overload. They hear the story, all fiat currencies fail. What else can you invest in? They're all in. They'll put 50% of their wealth in precious metals. And I don't say don't. I don't think you should personally. Some people can handle it. Am I at that level? Yeah, probably am at that level. But back on point, balance is what you want. And 25% is a huge number relative to what most people believe or think would be adequate. So if that message ever got out to, let's say, the certified financial planner community, because these people, and excuse my bias, I'm sure there's some very fine people. I, worked under one for a brief time, and he was quite good actually. But most of them, and even him, like to hide behind something. In other words, they are usually insurance brokers and
salespeople.
And so they don't want to make a decision that's wrong. So they love to pull out a pamphlet or a book or say, look, see, it said I have to give you, this kind of diversification in mutual funds, and if I don't, blah, 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 blah. So what they really need is pull a book off the shelf that says, look, 25% allocation of physical precious metals. And just think what that would do to the market. But I'm off on a bit of a tangent. But the point is, it is not an asset class that Wall Street wants advertised in any way, shape, or form. It's a very, very important commodity that's, given through the history, something that provides safety in a financial manner. And it's very, very high price per unit, talking gold or platinum or palladium right now. And these are things that, again, once they're very much needed because there has been the bank closure or the ATM doesn't produce anymore, or there's capital controls, you can't move money out of the country, or whatever takes place. And there's several scenarios that have taken place and probably will again. That is when people get the idea that, oh, geez, it might have been a good idea, but at that time it's usually unobtainable, meaning that perhaps the markets have seized up, they're closed, there's, electrical failure or whatever. So, I don't want to paint a big, bad, gloom, doom picture, because certainly, the bias is that tomorrow's going to be just like today and everything's going to be great. But the facts are they're not. That things are not great. If you look at real wages on an inflation-adjusted basis, the average American's standard of living has gone down steadily since 1978. That's a fact. And most people know that if you talk to them on the street. Because why? Well, because both people have to work to support a household, and they're driving used cars. They can't buy a new car every third year anymore. Why? Because the economy is getting harder and harder and harder on the average person. And we're getting to a point, in my view, where the trend is very obvious. You're going to have two classes of people, the rich and everybody else.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, just going into that a bit, because obviously it's better to be overprepared than underprepared. And looking at the fiat system, for example, the fundamentals are off the table due to the level of manipulation. So you can't really put a date on this is when it's going to happen, but you know it's going to happen, which is all the more reason why you kind of have to understand those negatives to make them a positive and be able to take financial control, have financial responsibility over your own life. That's why self-sustainability is so important. And as you kind of alluded to earlier, these big banks, for example, Germany, the German government, the German banks are all saying, gold and silver are bad. Meanwhile, they just repatriated, I think, the second biggest amount of gold ever on the planet from the Fed. And it goes to show they're hoarding it. They're speaking out against it, but they're hoarding it, just like they're hoarding, big cryptocurrencies while speaking out against them. There's a reason why these banks are doing this. It's not to just, have a little piece of the pie. They know what's happening. They know what's coming because it has happened countless times throughout history.
Yeah, and I've been able to speak with people from all over the world. I speak to people that have lived in Argentina through currency devaluations. I talked to a friend of mine that I work with. He has survived through hyperinflation in Yugoslavia. And all comes down to this preparation, like how they said they would done things differently, or there were some people that were prepared. But what my friend from Yugoslavia, former Yugoslavia, is Croatian, he said that the people that had gold and silver, he saw that they suddenly became landlords, and they had suddenly a lot of wealth at the other side of things. So it just tells us that history will always repeat itself when you implement this fiat fractional reserve banking system that they have. And it's no change today. Like we're seeing, just like as David Morgan has elaborated on greatly here, that we're seeing the end times of another fiat central banking era.
Yeah, and that isn't a bad thing necessarily. It's good to see an end to that system and be able to build up with good preparation and financial stability from our personal standpoint. Obviously, it's going to affect a lot of people very negatively. There's no doubt about it. It's happened time and time again. I just recently spoke with someone who lived in Venezuela and escaped the country about 2 years ago as he saw things starting to happen. And people at that time were still, Stockholm syndrome. No, nothing bad's going to happen. Everything's great. Yeah. And soon enough, he was called crazy, but now he's, seen as, well, you had a lot of foresight on this and you were able to protect your wealth.
Yeah, it's a trust game. And you just see, like, usually within a year, things happen. Like that's how fast the hyperinflation and the death of a currency
Absolutely,
happens.
absolutely. So, David, I wanted to ask you before we close it off, why do you do what you do? Why are you the silver guru? What kind of got you into this? Because everyone has kind of a story about why they do what they do, and obviously it kind of goes down a long rabbit hole. We all have a point where, you know, a light bulb goes off above our head and we kind of get into, you know, our career choice or our hobbies or etc. So what brought you to be the silver guru?
Well, it's kind of a three-part answer, or two-part anyway. Number one is when I was 11 years old, the currency changed in the United States from silver, 90% silver coinage to what I call the Johnson slug. So I used to get 25 cents a week allowance, and it was all silver, or 90% silver. And then one day I got this different quarter from my dad, and I looked at it, I thought, this just doesn't make any sense. This one's silver, I knew that. And this other one, I'm not sure what it is. It looks like it's copper and something else. And of course, they call it cupro nickel. It was nickel and copper. And I instinctively knew that they could not be equal in value. But none of the adults seemed to take that seriously. Some did, but not many. And of course, the Gersham's law took effect, and, you know, the silver coinage left the scene pretty quickly. Then later on, I've always been interested in money and finance, basically from the time I could read. And I just got to a point where I, you know, branched off into this field from my major, which was aeronautical engineering. I actually flew for a living for a while. But regardless, when I started a family, I just had this, you know, I don't want to sound too woo. You asked the question, I'll answer it. But I had this thought, very heavy on my heart, when my first daughter was born, asking me at a later age, because she's just a newborn, Dad, if you knew so much about economics and the financial system and what happens in these fiat debacles, why didn't you do something about it? And that thought came to me very heavy, and not just in my head. And I thought, you know, I'm doing this consulting, I'm doing fine, I'm trading pretty accurately, but, you know, I felt like I owed it to everybody and to her, you know, for the generational purposes. So from my perspective, you asked me, you know, if you can serve something greater than yourself, in other words, serve others, and also make the message more important than the person, in other words, the principle greater than the personality. Yeah, and I know I've got one. I think you have a very, very meaningful life, and I wanted to have a life with purpose. Money fascinated me. When I found out what corrupted money meant to society at large, it really hurt me. I really felt like, wow. And then when my daughter was born, I have two, I thought, you know, maybe I should stand up and do something. Because I'm a big guy, I got a deep voice, and blah, blah. And I've got fans and people that are not so much fans. Regardless of what you think of me personally, you know, I was much happier just kind of keeping my nose down, my head low. I didn't really want to come out and start shouting from the rooftops, you know, fire, 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 there's a financial crisis ahead. But it happened, and I'm happy I've done it. It feels like a much more fulfilling life. And of course, when you get these contra trend situations that we really had from 2011 in the silver market in April and September for gold, you know, a lot of people that used to love you basically hate you. And, you know, then you get a big swell in a new market like a cryptocurrency market, you draw less favor than ever. But that doesn't matter to me because the principles hold true. The objective reality that all fiat currencies fail, as you've said several times on your show, and the idea that a person's worth, a human being, male, female, whatever, that has the ability to provide their labor, either intellectually or physically or a combination thereof, has a right to earn something honestly. And when you have a dishonest system, you asked me earlier, what does it mean? It means the truth comes out, the truth is the most powerful, and all these things end badly. And only those that are aware of the foresight to look at history understand this. Shows like yours help. I've made my life's career about it, and I think that it's a message that will come. And I think it really did do well for, 10 years. I mean, gold went up 11 years in a row. And there are a lot of people that bought it for, let's say, the wrong reasons. Let me restate that. People, I'm a free market. They can buy it for whatever reason they want. Many of them early on bought it for the reasons of, I'll call it fear, worrying about the financial system. Later, a lot bought it for greed. Buy it to buy it. We're going to see, I think, a return to both of those. I think there's going to be a fear and greed-driven market at the same time in the next leg up, which probably won't peak until 2020 or so.
Yeah, absolutely. And oh man, what I give for a good voice for radio. But it's so important to understand these things. These are basic fundamentals to liberty and freedom themselves. Is the ability to have self-sustainability, financial responsibility, free markets, let the demand of the individual act rather than the lack of demand, the manipulation, the hand of the state. Individuals know best. Free markets are always right, even if sometimes they're uneducated. They're always right. And I think that gold, silver have prevailed for centuries and centuries, longer than that. And it's a good antidote to this fiat system that's crumbling before our eyes. It's good for people to be able to protect themselves and their family, and of course go out there and speak like David is. There's no point in having all this knowledge and doing absolutely nothing about it. It's a responsibility, not something that should be enforced, obviously, but a responsibility of free people to pass on the information to the next person and make sure that people also have an understanding about what's going on around them and are able to protect themselves and their families in the inevitable event of these massive downfalls of fiat currencies. But David, before we wrap it up, can you let our viewers know where they can go to find more of your work, your book, etc., and support the work that you do?
Sure. They just go to the main website, themorganreport.com. It's all one word, themorganreport.com. Get on our free email list. That'll give you everything. If you want, you can scroll down from the top menu. 2 of the books are available. We ship them ourselves. We've sold so few on Amazon lately. We sold a fair amount at the beginning. But both the books, Silver Manifesto and Second Chance, are available. The newsletter, of course, has 2 levels of service. It has the premium service and the mastermind service. But I say just get on the free email list. That's best. You'll get a free report called Riches and Resources. We outline several things, and we're still very, very bullish, not only on the metals, but actually on the commodity sector. And for those that don't know, and many don't, the ETF for base metals actually had a 4-year high breakout here a couple months ago. So even though commodities are down significantly from where they were, we're starting to see telltale signs that things are starting to turn around. And, commodities are what you need. If you can't grow it, it has to be mined. It's pretty simple.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, the David Morgan, the Morgan Report, I hope everybody goes and checks that out. Very need-to-know info. I really do suggest people kind of diversify their information among different medias. And that's the thing about when it comes to providing this kind of information. It's not a competition. No. We're all looking to be able to bring that information to the next level and make it more mainstream than it currently is.
Yeah, for the reasons that Dave said, when you get all this knowledge, and I got to that point too, where it's like, I got to start talking about this because it's such a damage to the populace in general that they have no clue what's going on.
Absolutely. So check out the Morgan Report. Thank you very much, David.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Like what you see here at WHAM? Don't forget to check the links below. GoFundMe, Patreon. We can't do it without you. Any donation is very much appreciated, especially as we are so overwhelmingly demonetized and censored by YouTube as the Anti-Defamation League comes in and flags all of our content as hate speech. You can also find me at Josh Sigurdson at steemit.com. That's steemit.com, the future of social media, where you get paid in the upvote of your post via Steem, the cryptocurrency. You can also find our Bitcoin address in the description and the comments below, as well as on the screen for you to scan if you please. And don't forget to come on down to Anarchapulco in Acapulco, Mexico in February, one of the best events of the year, and you can save money on your tickets by typing in promo code WHAM. That's WAM. We'll leave the link below for you, and until next time, don't forget to subscribe. This is Josh Sigurdson signing out from World Alternative Media. Find the truth, be the change.
Wow.